Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. Lovely to see so many people with us already this morning. My name is Matt Baird. I'm the host, founder, and chair of the Social Housing Roundtable, and I'll do a couple of intros in a moment. But just say a huge thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We do run these every single Tuesday at 11 a.m. And so if it's your first time, a massive welcome to you, and you're very, very, very welcome. You can find most of the entire back catalogue of the last 172 episodes. I think this is 173, available on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. And we're just delighted that so many of you have been able to jump on today and really kind of get engaged with a conversation that I probably don't talk about enough, which is bizarre because day to day I work in recruitment. So my background is recruitment. I've worked in it for 14 years. I've been self-employed for the last 4 or so, but partnered with the brilliant guys at Spirehouse last year. So if you're looking for any recruitment support, do know that your recruitment, if you're using us for it, it actually keeps this funding for free for everybody. So a huge thank you to everyone who's been able to do that. And I'm also co-chair of the board for a small charity in Birmingham that's focused on specialist supported housing. So kind of many different hats I'm looking at from this conversation today. But Simon and I met on one of my other areas, which is evidently because of the work on the roundtable, I'm asked to go and speak at various conferences or chair sessions or whatever it might be. And Simon and I got chatting after a session I ran on recruitment and retention at CIH Bristol, which was a couple of months ago, I think. This year it's already just zooming by. It was very nice to be back in the Southwest. And nice to kind of be back hearing accents that actually sound like they're, proper English people, but that's me. But I think what was fascinating was that you and I got talking after the session around a bit about the roundtable, but more about recruitment and actually what it's like recruiting from people from outside of the sector, where we get a lot of barriers with people who are adamant that you must have social housing experience if you're going to work in the sector. And sometimes where that hits barriers, but sometimes where that's absolutely necessary, and that balance between the two. And so, as I often do in these kind of situations, said, well, why don't you come on and do a roundtable about it? And fortunately for me, you jumped at it and said, yes, absolutely. So a big, big welcome, Simon. Please, I'll pass over to you to make your own introductions, to talk more broadly around, I guess, why you wanted to bring the topic to the table today. I think it's fair to say that this is going to be more of a discussion-led topic rather than you talking for half an hour and then a few questions. It's meant to be a more open forum discussion. So to begin with, while Simon's sharing his thoughts, if you have got ideas, thoughts, questions, please feel free to stick them in the chat box, but we will then move to a more open discussion. But Simon, good morning. I'll pass over to you.
So good morning. Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate you taking this opportunity towards me and letting me speak today. Like we've mentioned, we discussed recruitment after our little catch up at the CIH recently, or where we first met. Sounds like we've been on dating or something. So I wanted to really bring this talk to discussion because my background isn't social housing. However, I have been here for the last 7 years working for Sovereign Network Group. Currently as an operations manager, but I've worked my way up through over the last 7 years from property management into delivery manager role, through responsive works, plan works, and empty homes. So, controversial as it may be, my previous career was hospitality. So I worked 17 years in hospitality, running pubs, bars, restaurants. Had a apprenticeship prior to that in carpentry, which I found no enjoyment. It was not the thing that sort of kept me grounded, so to speak, and I always did hospitality as a side gig, I suppose. And that's kind of where this sort of conversation leads me a bit further into why I wanted to bring this discussion to the table. Now, although these industries may seem worlds apart, and what I have found that the skills I have developed through hospitality, so communication, problem solving, empathy, adaptability, have been absolutely vital in my role. Now, in hospitality, you learn quickly that it's not about just getting the job done. It's about how you make people feel while you're doing it. And it is a customer first mindset that is essential in housing also. I think more than ever, we need people like that and that mindset in our industry. So with the introduction of AWOB's law, there's a renewed and critical focus. Can't get my teeth in today. So it's a Bristolian accent tone. Focus on responsiveness, accountability, and the health and safety of our customers. So it's going to be a demand for faster action. It's going to be clearer communication needed and a more proactive approach towards our customer care. So although we might see this as a challenge when recruiting, the fear is that new regulations mean we need more people with technical knowledge or sector-specific experience. Now, although that's correct, we do need to ensure that compliance and understanding of the law is critical. I would argue that AWAB's law actually strengthens a case for recruiting outside of the sector. And I believe this because the heart of the law is customer experience. It's about how we listen, it's about how we respond, and it's about how we prioritize those people's well-being. These are the things that customer-focused professionals from hospitality, from retail, from service industries that do exceptionally well. And I will say that is where I've learned to deliver the way I have. I've increased tenant satisfaction measures within my locality and how I've driven a customer sort of rapport and a focus with my team to drive those measures up. So aside from that, we can teach regulations. We can explain policy and procedure. It's much harder to teach someone how to be naturally empathetic, how to be calm in a tense conversation, or how to make resident feel heard. How do they feel respected and also valued? So with that, I believe we can bring people in from other industries. It's not just about having a housing background. It's about the customer focus and being able to develop and support those people moving forward. Now, I've seen this firsthand. I am a product of that. I've colleagues that are products of that who've come in from different industry, from a letting industry, from hospitality, from retail, and straight from trades who have never, ever worked in a social housing atmosphere. Now, the last few days, and Matt and I were discussing this just prior to the call, I've been interviewing for maintenance surveyors. Now, I've got one lad who has applied. He's currently the front runner for that role. He is Army background. He's currently working as a builder after he left the Army 5-6 years ago. Hasn't ever worked in the industry. Hasn't worked for Sovereign Network Group. However, he is a front runner. He has researched AWAB's law. He has researched regulation. He's understands surveying of a property because he's got those skill sets necessary. That person is my front runner at the moment to take one of the positions available to me. So I think from there onwards, and I'll open this to discussion now, let's not limit ourselves to those people that we recruit out of the sector or in the sector. Let's open our minds, let's look at what we've got available to us and look at that customer focus.
And where are you in terms of, your colleagues when they're looking at this more broadly? Because there is still a need for understanding, obviously, how the sector works, where it comes from, why we're at where we are, the history of it and everything else. How is that, I guess, being perceived by colleagues more broadly? The idea, actually, sector experience doesn't matter to me because, as I say, 14 years of recruiting in this space, there'll be some people who are absolutely like, no, look, we'll look at people from a range of backgrounds, and others who are absolutely adamant. If you don't understand housing, you're not going to be able to get to grips with it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've got colleagues who work in different parts of the business who I've worked with more recently who are really open-minded into that. And, I've interviewed with them. I know colleagues who've interviewed, alone with others who really look into the, what that person can deliver, how adaptable they are, and, can they come into the industry without sector knowledge? And we've employed those people, in Sovereign. I know that on a property services level. But we also run that development aspect of let's support you with regulation, let's support you with a CIH. I've just completed my level 4 CIH. So, I am, again, part of that movement going forward. And we've got a great development team that supports that and, great managers across the board alike. But a lot of our trades, they come in outside of social housing. Those are people, and I look at it, and I know others, other colleagues of mine who I work closely with also look at trades when we report, recruiting into property, who can give a great customer service. It's one of our questions that we ask: what would you do, to support a customer? And I've had trades come to me and say, well, actually, I sat with an old 85-year-old lady who, didn't have anybody to have lunch with that day, so I had my lunch with her. It's great. It's great service. We're building rapport with a customer. I think there's a bigger element to it. So, it's just being open-minded more than anything, in my opinion.
I appreciate it, and I imagine there'll be a lot of questions that come through in a moment. I've got about 20 flying through my own head, but Brian, I'll bring you in because I've noticed you've raised your hand. Do feel free to come in. Like Brian, if you want to kind of jump on the chat and bring your ideas in, please feel free to use the React tool at the bottom of the screen, or go on the chat, send me a message directly, and say that you'd like to come in. I can bring you in that way as well. Or as I say, as others have done, just put a question in the chat and we'll make sure it gets asked. But Brian, over to you.
I completely agree with Simon on this one. I was an FOH for years in the hotel business, and it's a question of dealing with issues and dealing with problems and dealing with questions, and an understanding of, well, I prefer to use the word tenant rather than customer, but you have that situation where you have to have that understanding and empathy with whoever you're dealing with. And too many organizations are stuck in a framework where if they're councils or housing association, oh no, we do it this way. Well, actually pulling in ideas from different businesses, different industries, I was able to take what I learned in the hotel industry and go into the motor industry, because part of my job in the motor industry was solving problems and solving issues. And I came in with a fresh outlook. And too many organizations don't want that fresh outlook. We've been doing it this way for the last 50 years. And we have this framework. Well, sometimes you need to break open that cage and look at some other ideas from other areas and other businesses to bring it in. And there's a restriction in a lot of cases on when people are recruiting. Will they fit in with us? Well, no, actually, will they bring some new ideas that will blow air, ideas out of the water and make things better? Because in the end of the day, they're there to service the tenants or customers or residents in a particular area. And you have to have that understanding and the willingness to have an open mind to see how it can be done.
Thank you very much, Brian. I can see a lot of people nodding along. I'm going to go to Samantha and then I'll come back to you, Simon. But Samantha, I'll bring you in.
Just unmuting myself. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll totally echo and agree with everything that's been said by colleagues there. I would add a caveat. I think it's really important that in any team, any organisation, we do need those diverse perspectives, and we only can do that by bringing in people that do have those different backgrounds and transferable skills, because that's what's so valuable here. Provided that there is a robust induction, whatever you might want to call it, a robust process whereby you are enabling that individual to develop the skills or the knowledge that they don't yet have, that will then obviously come together with the transferable skills they already possess to make them a very well-rounded housing professional. So I think that's really key. I have seen people come into an organisation, they've got some fantastic background and really something strong to offer, but then they're hitting the ground running without the knowledge.
This hasn't been announced, so
without the support.
but I would encourage you.
That means that they can end up drowning, or maybe not even making it past probation. But nonetheless, as long as there is a really robust support system to enable that person to gain incrementally the skills, and that could be a qualification, or it could be simply in some way that there is an internal process of enabling someone to do that professional development. So I think the CPD, the professional development element, is key. It is crucial. Having that diversity and openness to hear a different way of doing things. There is a fixed mindset quite frequently. Like, this is how we do it. We do not deviate from that. You slot into this or you don't fit. What we need is, how can we actually do things differently or better or improve? And are there elements that this individual brings from another industry that we can learn from? And that's the growth mindset that we need to see much more in order to embrace the realities of housing, because it is a fantastic industry and we have the opportunity to make such a difference to people's lives.
We do, and you can see in the chat there, I mean, Raj has just put it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Having talent come into the housing world as a fresh start is brilliant, but there are certainly elements of knowledge that can't be explained and can only be achieved by experience of the sector.
Yeah.
I understand, though, that having individuals in senior positions who have no experience or knowledge of the sector is going to be the downfall of many organisations. This then leads to the culture change of an entire team and people start to leave. But then I guess conversely, there are a few points made earlier in the chat. So Lucy had said I studied and worked in accommodation, hospitality management, as well as my dad being a pub landlord for most of my childhood. I think hospitality is a great way to start in terms of working in housing. Colin pointed out that Grenfell and Awab, the issues at Rochdale, have managers with the highest housing sector certification, but still there were huge failures. And Grant pointed out, is the issue qualification or just people, great people skills who can empathise and get the job and service done rather than pen pushers? And I mean, Simon, I'm going to go back to you before I bring in some of our other guests, but as we thought this was going to be quite, I guess, not necessarily polarising, but a lot to debate within this discussion. For you, do you ever, and I guess this is more of a broad question, if you had two candidates who were very even and one had housing experience, how much value would you put on housing experience itself? Because it's well and good, don't get me wrong, as saying, look, we must embrace this idea of recruiting from outside of the sector. But has housing experience itself, does it hold any weight for you when you're looking to recruit? Or do you think more broadly the sector looks at it with some weight behind it?
I think there's two elements to that. I think the sector definitely looks at it with a bigger weight because, you know, like rightly being said, you know, we do sometimes box ourselves into that mindset. I think for me, there's that thing called gut feeling. You know, when you interview someone, you get a gut feeling about them, whether it's good, bad, you know, how the rapport you build with them. And if you're not 100% certain on that first interview, second interview, grab a coffee with them afterwards or another date to sort of just get a better feel again. And it could be that that person with the housing background has got the better, you know, is the better person for the role. But very often you can sometimes find it's the other person who hasn't got the housing sector knowledge, who you just get that feeling is the right fit for your team and for your role. Because it's not just about the role, it's the team as well. You know, you're building a dynamic, you're building a team. And that, again, that'll be controversial, I'm sure. But, you know, it is all about team building.
And as you can see, like Sue's put in the chat there, it's interesting to note that housing associations tend to claim they value diversity, but this sort of mindset on needing to have housing experience doesn't always showcase that. Richard said, I actively try and recruit into my teams from outside of housing, and I've done for years. We focus on behaviours, especially from customer-facing roles. I have 3 people who used to be at John Lewis. Alicia, I'm going to bring you in, and then we'll go to Jim and Evelyn before looking at the chat, and then I'll go to Keith and Jamie. But Alicia, over to you.
Hi, I'm a tenant, an informed tenant, and I think things have changed so much over the last 2 years. And one of the biggest issues we face, especially from those of us wanting more national tenant involvement, is the intransigence of people who've been in the housing sector for 20, 30 years, who think they know everything, and they actually haven't maybe understood just how much things are changing. So I think there's more of a need for people to be innovative and for them to be open, as you say. And I think one of the things I regularly speak with tenants having problems with the landlords, and we need to get away from this precious idea, this idea that, you know, that you do need that 20, 30 years of being in the housing sector. But the one thing I would say, and I've actually looked at your website this morning, Simon, and I've seen that your board members are, a lot of them are from outside the area. And I know you have, you know, you've had the, you know, you're just kind of had the you know, you've just kind of blended in together. But the one thing that is important is if we're going to have people from outside the industry, we're not just talking about staff who've got experience of the sector, we're also talking about tenant involvement. And I'll be honest, I'm putting you on the spot here, Simon, and it's not a criticism, but I couldn't see an awful lot about tenant involvement on your website. So I think it's important. If you look at AWAB's law, for instance, some of us who are TPAS members were actually on a discussion with the ministry last week about AWAB's law. They were actually asking for our feedback to help, because there's going to be the two documents, one for landlords and one for tenants. And they were actually asking for our feedback. And as someone who's spent nearly 2 years now advising other tenants on how to use the HHSRS and the Decent Home Standard, which is what AWAB's law is all about. There's nothing new in AWAB's law at all, apart from the fact that we will be able to sue our landlords for breach of contract. But I do think it's very good idea to have people from outside the sector, but as well as having the people who do have knowledge of working within the sector among the staff, we also need to have a bigger role for informed tenants.
No problem. Thank you very, very much, Simon. In fact, I'll bring in Jim because he's another informed tenant, and then I'll come back to you, Simon, on those points. But Jim, do come in.
Yeah. Hi, Simon. Nice to give you your time and speak to us this morning. My thing I'm thinking of is looking at people coming from outside, and you're saying like, well, what is it that will be needed for the tenants and things? I'm thinking that it's a question now of asking the tenants themselves. I've noticed in a lot of the comments, what can we do? How can we do this? I think it's time now that the tenants themselves were given the floor and allowed to come forward with what matters to them, not what is perceived to matter. We've done a good few years now working on our ABS law. We've done a fair bit with after the Grenfell, fire and what happened with that, the social housing reviews and things. I think it's time now we should be moving towards looking at sections 106 and moving forward paragraph L and seeing where we're going to go further on into housing. Myself, I think it's a good idea that you have people from outside the sector because, there's a lot of different experiences. But when you follow all the webinars continuously, you'll see that they're very much of a muchness. They're all pretty much discussing the same subjects and they're not really moving on anywhere, quickly. So I think that's what needs doing, actually talking to the tenants themselves if you want to know what they want and getting it from them themselves, from the bottom up instead of it being passed down from top down.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. Simon, I'm going to come back to you on that because there was a point made in the chat and I was trying to find it before and I can't see it, and sorry to whoever raised it, around Judith. So how do you think organisations can plan to increase the training of tenants so they can develop a career in housing? Jamie said, I'm sure some providers have trialled this, but that way as well of, I guess, getting a different perspective, because, there's no getting away from the fact that housing has done it however much the same way for many, many years and generations now, and actually not just through housing's fault, through huge amounts of change and everything else going on and nowhere near enough building. We're now in things aren't necessarily getting better. And so we do need more voices. But in terms of that point, I guess, around, as Alicia and Jim have both made, around that tenant perspective and that different view of tenants and maybe that removing of stigma that sometimes happens if people have been in the industry for a long time. Are you seeing that change when you are recruiting from outside the sector, or more broadly, I guess, how did you see it when you first entered the sector as a very different kind of, but very similar kind of customer base, I guess?
So I mean, Alicia and Jim raised some really good points there. Appreciate, that tenant involvement is probably lapsed in some areas. I will reassure Alicia, in terms of SNG, I know that we do have, tenant members who we feed in with regularly. Something we look to do in terms of where I'm based too is have those conversations with our tenants, our customers, and understand what they need, or how we can make their lives better through one factor or another. And this is part of, I suppose, closing the loop in that relation. So we'll do our engagement surveys or anniversary surveys in terms of that, and we'll physically make contact back to that customer if they're scoring us low for whatever reason. Pick up the phone, have a conversation. How can we improve? What can we do to make this better? But also, adversely, the other way, if we get some really great answers in, we'll make that call back. And that, for me, is where the customer focus element comes in, and that that customer sort of engagement is more needed both in and out of the industry. I suppose for me, in terms of when I was recruited, I was very fortunate that the manager who took me on took a punt. I was known as the wild card, is what he told me on a recruitment day. About 6 months into my working career with SNG, it was, he goes, you had the customer focus, that customer, centric element that we needed, as well as your managerial experience. And I was fortunate that I was, a managerial position for a long time. I had some great development behind me, some great people who led that, who I still idolize, I suppose, out of this industry, because none of them work for us, which is great. I think in terms of bringing people in, as long as that focus is there for development, for ensuring we're engaging with that person, making sure that they are on the right foot from the minute we say go, I don't see a huge problem with it personally. And I'm open to to criticism on that, because I feel that there are some products out there of of that making.
Thank you very much, Simon. Evelyn, I'm going to bring you in.
Thanks, Matt. Really good discussions. And,
Did you move a little bit closer to your mic? Sorry.
I know I pulled it
There
up.
we go,
I
lovely.
apologise. Yeah, I had
No,
it.
that's perfect.
I had it
Now
up,
thank
not
you.
down. Sorry. So some really, really good points that have been raised by colleagues in the room. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of areas. So the first one is, I do agree with Samantha in terms of the sector having people come from outside and coming to the sector. I was one of them. I spent 5 years in Barclays, didn't understand anything about the sector at all. And I didn't understand why I was in this call center raising repairs for people, but it was because I was so interested in the service part of it. That's what made me go in and study housing. And I think it was the best decision that I've ever made. So I feel quite strongly the Housing Association should be looking for skills people, outside the sector, especially when we're going through a time when recruitment and retention still remains a major issue in the sector. So it's something that I think we should be open to, because it also helps us to see what other sectors are doing in terms of customer centricity. So basically, how are they dealing with this, and bringing in those ideas would help to make housing associations even better organizations than they are. And there was another mention about development of tenants. I strongly, strongly believe in that. I feel that it works, and it's been tested by housing associations such as Phoenix Community Housing. So they created the Phoenix Academy for the main reason of giving tenants the ability to be able to train. And those tenants some of them have started from a level 1 in housing and gone up to a level 5. And, there's several case studies on how they've worked. And that's why the academy is even looking to expand, because of all the work that they've done. And that gives them, more opportunities to work in their housing associations, and they can take that skill as far as they want to and get involved, because as we all know, we serve tenants, but what they bring in terms of them having that lived experience within the area and the neighborhood is invaluable. So those are the two areas that I wanted to touch on. I think it's a good idea that we keep looking out of sector.
Thank you very, very much. Keith, I'll bring you in.
Thank you. Found the unmute button. I echo Evelyn's point that once people are in, they want to stay. I think that we've seen that time and time again. In fact, one of our speakers this year so far, or maybe not appropriate to say who, I recruited them, and I must admit, I was only about 10 minutes into the interview, and I thought, yeah, you're a keeper. We still put them through the mill, of course, but we knew that they were going to come in, and they came from another sector, which was good. So I do recognise that. However, I don't want to see that as being what we should be doing. We should be casting the recruitment net as wide as possible, and we should be looking for a great mix in amongst us. And I take the point that a lot of people have made about how, there are some organizations, mainly individuals in those organizations, who are entrenched in the ways of doing things. And I wonder, there are two questions in my mind. One is, why aren't we getting more good quality candidates coming to us in the first place? What is it that's so unattractive about the sector? Because, as Evelyn says, once you're in, you love it. Love's maybe a strong word, but you definitely want to stay. It has its moments. But I think for me, I'm worried that we're running scared, and that the rest of the world has got a perception about social housing that is pinned around Grenfell, AWAB, et cetera, and therefore there's generally, it's not a place where people want to work until they actually engage with us. And so is there by extension of that idea, a fear of doing things too differently, because if we get it wrong, the inspections, the regulation, the health and safety requirements, the tenancy management requirements, all of these things, are we just basically scared of doing things too different? Because I think personally, on the front line, people know absolutely what to do, and they absolutely want to do the right thing. But whether they think they've got the freedom to do it or not, I think is a big question mark in my mind.
And whether they're empowered and have the time as well, Keith. And I completely agree with an awful lot you said. I think it's also worth the conversation, and I can see it's been brought up in the chat. I think there's two other parts. I think one is that people still don't know about housing, and I think there's a big piece going on. Obviously, Eddie Holt's campaign at the moment of Choose Housing is trying to work on that kind of piece. But the other side that I think is quite difficult, certainly, and it's a piece I'm running into a lot at the moment, more on the asset management and the housing management side, though it's still a challenge, is pay. And we are a sector that, when trying to compare to the private sector, is, we do run into challenges there of comparable pay. And I mean, Hannah's put in the chat, she came into housing after 8 years of sales and marketing. To be successful, you need to be resilient, solutions focused, creative, have a good knowledge and interest in learning and helping your customers. I knew housing was the industry I wanted to be in. I had a huge drive to match my career with my social purpose. And I was really lucky to be given the opportunity to start as a housing officer. And I strongly support Samantha on her comments, re diversity and the importance of a strong onboarding. There's also a point from my colleague Kim, who's with us in the chat today, which says, I'm fully on board of broadening recruitment pathways within the sector, whether that's for individuals with lived experience or those bringing transferable skills that can ultimately benefit the tenants and hopefully the overall sector. However, a key concern arises around managing those salary expectations. How do we strike that fair balance between those entering the sector with no direct experience and those who've been in long-standing roles with significant experience? There's a real challenge in both attracting and retaining housing professionals. If new hires enter at the same salary band as experienced staff, do we risk existing professionals feeling undervalued and potentially leaving? It feels like a double-edged sword when it comes to monetary value. So how do we navigate that without compromising either recruitment or retention? And just before I bring in Jamie, the reason I'm bringing that up is because actually there's a point just raised by Tossin here, which says that I think it's a good idea we tap into different experiences and ideas. But what we need to be clear on is how do we balance this with internal growth of existing staff? As if they don't feel they can progress and are constantly being replaced by external staff, they would leave, and that could be the start of a different conversation. So Simon, I mean, on that, just before I bring in Jamie, because there were a couple of people hands up, they both lowered their hands. But just before I bring in Jamie, I mean, Simon, on that, are you finding that balance is a challenge?
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertical. Alertical helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertical works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024.
I think so. I think there's always going to be a challenge with balance, isn't there? In terms of empowering your current team to progress and develop. But obviously, there's going to be people in there who don't want to move on from what they're doing in their role. For example, I think from experience, I felt glass ceilings at a company I worked for previously, which obviously out of this sector, didn't empower me to move forward. I had all the development opportunity, but couldn't go any higher just because those roles were filled and had been filled for 10, 15, 20 years in some cases, because again, it's another company that people didn't want to leave. I think within SNG, for me at the moment, my team have got opportunities to develop, and obviously to go up is a case of somebody moving up or moving out, and that's going to be the sticking point in any business you work in terms of that. So yeah, I mean, balance is a struggle no matter where you work to. I also think there are struggles further out of this. So in terms of recruitment, if you said to somebody who doesn't work in social housing, or housing at full stop, would you come and work for us, or would you come and work in this industry? It's not glamorized. It's like hospitality jobs. You know, when you're younger, waiter, waitress isn't seen to be a glamorous job, as is, I feel, sometimes housing, because of what we as an industry deal with on day in, day out basis. So I think it's trying to convince people as well of that change of, you know, actually, this is a great job. There is great benefit to it, and you can feel proud and empowered of what you do.
Thank you very much. Jamie, I'm going to go to yourself and then I'll go to Raj. Good to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm just coming back to something that Keith mentioned a little bit ago, and it didn't say it in these many words, but what came across to me was we need to rewrite the story of what social housing actually is. A lot of it, especially in the news over the last few years, it has been very negative. Here's a whole stack of challenges. Pick an organisation, and you know they usually showcase as "you're terrible, how very dare you," and it all sounds very defensive. Doesn't cast us in a good light. So kind of almost we need to get out ahead of the curve and start to tell the success stories, tell about how in difficult circumstances, with nothing going for us, we're actually making the best of it all and creating success. That in itself will generate a lot of good stuff, which will, you know, kind of move on down the line. So kind of move away from this defensive approach. But you get it in a lot of the recruitment stuff. It's like, you know, we need significant experience of, or so many years experience. It's like, what on earth do people mean by that, really? What are you looking for? You know, are you able to add up, or, you know, are you able to do whatever it happens to be? What is it we really want that we couch in this very mysterious language of significant experience? So do we need innovation in the sector? Yeah. Do we need business effectiveness? Do we need how to engage the voice of the voiceless? How do we get people in who are tenacious in the pursuit of the actually good? Masters of customer value, all of those kind of things. You know, we've got to avoid here are the people who are going to bring in exactly what we need, whether it's tenants, customers, residents, whether it's, you know, people from one sector or another. We can't hold up anyone as being they are what we need. It's the skills that we need to be able to translate it. There's a sense in which if you can bring someone in who is incredibly curious and able to apply their skills to the housing sector, willing to learn, asking the cabbage head questions, what does things look like in this particular area? It's good for itself because it helps embed skills in the context, and it also helps challenge long-standing people who've been around to be able to say, actually, that's a really good question. How do I answer that? Because we're so used to not asking those questions of ourselves. So as you bring in great people from hospitality, from aerospace industry, from wherever it happens to be, you've got these masters of everything. How do we then harness that into good teams? And this, because it's team effectiveness. You know, when you hear success stories, it's very rarely one individual. It's everybody together. So how do we collectively group people together to then generate its own success that will then start to answer some of these wider questions that we've actually doing? It's not that we need good people. We have a mission that we need to apply good people to, I think.
I agree. And I think a lot of this actually starts with your HR and recruitment, and both recruitment teams, internal and external, and your partners. And that question you've answered, that question you've asked there, Jamie, of why, is really, really key, because it's something that we were discussing this with the guys at Spirehouse. Me, Kim, and Athena were discussing this the other week. Around, quite often we'll get, oh yeah, we need this or we need that, or this is essential, this might be. And when you're working with someone externally in recruitment, or even with your internal recruitment teams, it should be, well, why do you need that? Do we actually, or is that just, what are you going to gain from someone who has got 10 years experience that doesn't have it? What is it that actually is quantifiable? What's the piece you're looking for? Because it isn't just experience, because we've all worked with people who've worked in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years that we probably don't want to work with again or don't rate. But equally, we've got people who've, I was working with the business last year probably, beginning of last year, and they'd had 5 hires. And I mean, don't get me wrong, as support workers, it's a very different level of role compared to some of the roles we've discussed today. And out of those, 3 were previous experience in housing and 2 had none. And the 2 who flew through their probation were those who'd never had housing experience, because they didn't have the bad experiences from before. They didn't have those negative, I guess, traits that they'd picked up. But also, and more importantly, they weren't burned out. They weren't going in almost fatigued. They weren't going in going, well, I just don't know what else to do. This is where I'm stuck. They wanted this job. And that balance between the two, Jamie, I couldn't agree more with you on. Raj, I'm going to bring you in. Good to have you with us today.
I was going to make the rookie mistake of just talking without unmuting. Morning. Lovely to be here. Great to see you all. So I'm going to say that it's going to be quite controversial, and that's who I am. Social housing, the sector is becoming a bit lazy, if I'm honest with you. I think, especially when it comes to recruitment. If you look at various housing providers, registered providers, local authorities, you're right. You've got the same people that have just plodded their way, accidentally going into senior positions where they really don't have any business being or any knowledge of it, where that's where the laziness comes in, because again, someone talked about innovation and bringing in fresh new ideas, etc., which is where you would get external bodies coming into the social sector. That's where I think the laziness has become, because actually what happened 20 years ago, what happened 10 years ago, what happened 3 years ago isn't the same as what it is nowadays. You can't carry on doing the same thing. So talking around resident involvement and having our community's voices heard, I mean, I like to call myself the engagement queen, but to be fair, it's something that I'm extremely passionate about. I'm all about having the resident voices heard. I want to make tangible change. I want them to have more of an impact on our services. It leads to a greater thing of service improvement, etc., etc. But we won't go into that too much. But saying this, I also believe that whoever you're working for, whatever organization it is, they also need to make sure that they take seriously the resident's voice. And it's not just a governance tick box exercise. Oh, we'll do a scrutiny on repairs. Oh, great, we've done it. Here's and nothing happens. Nothing changes. So for me, if that was to happen, and it has done on occasion, where if us as an organization don't change, don't listen, don't want to move on, well, then actually, is that a right fit for me? And I've been in the social housing sector for 15 years, So again, it's that laziness of our almost seniors, etc., that has an impact on us worker bees. So again, talking about the glamour and bringing people into the social sector from external, whether it be banking, hospitality, whatever the case may be, it's not attractive because the salaries aren't attractive. They're attractive when you're a director. However, those people aren't going to leave until they retire. So anything below that is not attractive. The salary is not attractive. So actually, for me, I don't do it for the salary. That sounds so cliche. Of course, I've got bills to pay, but actually, it's not my motivating factor. My motivating factor isn't money. My motivating factor is to make sure that actually we're having the true voice of the resident shape the services that we provide. And up until that day doesn't happen, well, then that's the day that I will be leaving. Do you know what I mean? So to be fair, there's so many things to unpack here, and they're all you could have a whole talk and session on each and every single one. But yeah, that's me. Raj, over and out.
Thank you very, very much. Just before I'm going to go to, I'm going to go to Emma first now. Isn't me cutting out Jim? It's just I always like to get from as many voices as we can through this platform. But just before I do, I mean, I think there's some really, really good points made there by both Jamie and Raj. I think another point that's come up, Simon, that might be, I guess, prevalent to some of the work you're doing at the moment, which is from Vixing in the chat. I can understand the argument for permanent roles where there's time to develop people, but having recruited interims into the sector for 20 years, I understand the need for interims to come in and hit the ground running. But is there scope for a sector that is under so much strain at the moment to embrace interims who don't have specific housing knowledge and experience, but have worked with vulnerable client groups in the past? Or are we too entrenched with the mindset? And as Morris has said afterwards, they should look to humanise roles and highlight the skills required, and maybe not so much experience within the sector. This puts others at a disadvantage. Could refresh the way you recruit and how you recruit, show the routes you can take and the benefits. And the reason I wanted to bring in Morris's point alongside that, just before I bring Simon back in, is quite often these roles will go temp to perm. So you're bringing an interim, you need someone quick who maybe, has got those experience. And we're quite stuck in that kind of mindset, particularly within the interim market, on must have housing experience. We almost don't value anything else because that hit the ground running phrase, which I've probably heard more times than I was going to make something inappropriate time, but I heard it thousands of times over the years. Actually, that's where you can kind of get stuck. And Simon, do you find this Do you have a different mindset when you're looking at interims or perm, or when you're speaking to people in the sector? Do you think that mindset shifts there?
It's not something that I've come across so much in the last 7 years with SNG, to be honest with you. But I think if I was sat in that position, I would look to opportunity for secondment opportunities within the teams, because it's empowering some of those people who may not have looked to a secondment, you know, getting their managers to also look at empowering those people to bring them forward. It's a development opportunity. It's an opportunity that could open a door to a permanent role, like you said, but then bring somebody else in, maybe from the outside, you know, outside the sector. So it's something I'm definitely take on board, and definitely something I'll be thinking about as I move forward. So yeah, it's an interesting comment, that.
It certainly is. Emma, I'm going to go to you because I've not heard from you yet. So Emma, I'm going to bring you in first.
Can you hear me okay?
We've got you.
Thanks, Matt. So I just wanted to give my 2 pence on this subject as a relatively newbie to housing. So I haven't been in housing for 15, 20 years. I joined from a corporate career that I had, and I joined housing as a non-exec. So I did have a little bit of experience in housing, and then I came into a permanent housing role, both in a local authority and a housing association. And so I was very much of, yeah, I'm coming with the new ideas and fresh thinking, and I only have experience from a non-exec perspective. Now, having been in housing for 4 years, I can totally understand why people say you need to have at least a kind of a good sort of foundational knowledge of housing. It is such a specific, interesting sector. And I think we need a bit of both, right? Like all these things. It's great to bring those new ideas and fresh approaches, definitely around kind of customer centricity, which the private sector has been doing for a long time. You think about your Amazon experience and all that sort of stuff. But I do think you absolutely need to have kind of the social value piece at the heart. And I think people go into housing because they love it. And so I am now, even though I'm a newbie, I wouldn't not hire someone because they haven't been in housing for 15 years, but I do absolutely appreciate the experiences that people who have been in housing for a long time bring to the table. So that's a kind of my opinion from a newbie, if you like. So I just thought I'd kind of put that in.
No, it's brilliant, and it's exactly where the discussion needs to be had, because there's no point in us having this discussion around all of these ideas are great and we have to be more broad, and particularly at a time when we don't have enough staff in housing anyway and we have to look more broadly. But that doesn't mean we can undervalue the sector experience that we have got, because otherwise you're losing so much ideas and so many people who've actually gone, I know you want to try that, but we've tried it before.
We tried it, and for this reason, and you have to absolutely appreciate people's experience who've been round the block and seen it all, and understand and take the lessons learned. So yeah, I'm kind of I sit in both camps, I guess.
That's not a bad place to be, particularly on a more balanced conversation. So thank you, Emma. There's a comment from Marie in the chat around Connie Jennings has done a lot of work in terms of pioneering employment from their housing customers, as she's well worth reaching out to if you're interested in that. Alex has said that many of our customer voice group are on the Housing Association's Board Diversity Programme to help move away from the stale male pale status quo. Brian has said tenant involvement is not just formal meetings and groups. Listening to people on the ground and making a difference is just as important. Good staff who feel empowered is just as important and work hand in hand with formal groups. Couldn't agree with you more. Alicia liked the idea of tenant academies. Tossin has said, I've already raised that point, apologies. Raj mentioned that I totally agree around having the resident voice heard. It really does depend on the provider and if it's just a tick box exercise or do they want tangible input and changes. And Natalie has said, I came from a sales background, almost 20 years in account management, and I think there's a lot of transferable skills. However, when I started, we were in the office every day, and every day as a team, there'd be a what would you do here conversation. And to me, that was the way. I'm just going to mute Sani a second. To me, that was the way I developed my skills and knowledge. On a tangent, I think we have the problem with retaining frontline staff, and a lot of this is not being together as teams enough. And new starters receive basic training, and then they're left to get on with it. And the reason I wanted to raise that is because that was a point when I mentioned about the support workers. One of the key things that they realised that came out of that was they were spending more time with people who didn't have experience than those who did. Because if you have experience, you should just be able to get on with it, was sometimes the mindset. And it took that to make people realise, actually, you've still got to embed in our culture and how we do it and what we're about. Jim, I'm going to come to yourself. We've got about 5-10 minutes left. So I want to kind of fire through some points. So Jim, over to you. Then we're going Keith, then we'll go Sani, and then I'm going to some points in the chat. But Jim, quick one from you.
Just very quickly, really doesn't matter which sector you come from. There are so many great agencies and platforms out there that you can train with, work alongside. So many conferences, events, and things that are available. You know, it's all there for the asking. Just go on site, go online and things, and there are any number of people who can help you and give you guidance if you're unsure. So I think the question is, it's, do you put your tenants first, and is that your primary concern? You know, and make sure that your primary is housing people, making sure people who don't have homes do have homes, and that's primary concern before worrying about social, personal values. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Keith, over to you.
Just interesting, following on from Raj's comments about laziness in the sector, that a few weeks ago we had conversations about burnout in the sector. So I do take issue with it. I don't think there's laziness in the sector. Happy to argue this offline, but there may be an inertia due to lack of resources, lack of direction, or something like that. But I think genuinely the people that are in social housing want to do the absolute best, and they want to work hard for their customers. But it's not always an easy thing to actually make headway.
I wonder if there's a balance there between burnout and laziness and the way it's perceived. People kind of going, actually, I've just got nothing left behind the eyes and I'm just going through the motions. Actually, they're burned out. And I wonder if there's but that's definitely
big conversation, that one. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that could be a fascinating one. Thank you very much, Keith. Sani, great to see you back with us. I haven't seen you for a little while. Lovely to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. It's been a while, I know. Busy times, but that's housing for you. Very, very busy. And as we're talking in regards to the recruitment, I think it's important to also showcase, and somebody already mentioned, what we do as housing, as a sector in particular, and how much opportunities and different type of roles, over 200 roles within the housing sector. And yet not many people outside of that know about them. And we need to start working with schools and local colleges and universities to try to actually embed the culture in terms of getting people into the career of housing, and not just necessarily neighborhood officers or anything like that. You can become a plumber, electricians, you can be the surveyors, you can be contract managers, project managers, so many different roles within housing, and we're just not showcasing that enough. And talking from the Wales perspective, we have shortages in surveyors, for instance, in certain project managers. Yes, by all accounts, we can bring people in from external to the sector that haven't worked in the sector before, which would be great, but we need to attract them into the sector in the first place. And, careers, and for housing associations, we need to do more in terms of recruiting and building people from the ground up as well. So apprentices, we need to go back out there and start employing more apprentices in whatever role, whether it's IT, whether it's trade. We need to start doing a lot more of that. And that's why how we can bring in fresh ideas, diverse thought, and new innovation coming through.
Thank you very much. And I think that's so much what this is about, which is that balance. And I think it's why Simon and I knew it's why we wanted to bring this conversation to the table, because there is so much balance going on. It's very difficult to weigh it up. I'd had a point which was made anonymously, which says some housing organisations really need to look at their recruitment IT portal gateways and actually the recruitment process. There's no point discussing more broadly how fair it might be if actually it's inaccessible for some or for all. Alicia said, I was talking with a member of our excellent damp and mould team. They were saying that many existing members of staff didn't want to touch this with the barge pole. It's enabled a new team to develop their own practices, and without doubt, they've become firm favourites with the tenants. The team loves their work, and the freedom that being new has allowed them, which is really interesting to hear. And Jamie has said that feedback bonus here being how this highlights people's fears about areas such as damp mould condensation, so these can be remedied supportively for wider benefit. We've raised those points, raised a couple of those points. Tossin has said we have a lot of tenants who are staff already, and they've been employed because they had the skill, expertise, and grit that was required for the role that was advertised. Morris has mentioned transferable skills are so key. It's not highlighted enough. what those might be. And actually, maybe that's an internal thing we need to look at when we're looking at job adverts. What's the actual skill we require, not the knowledge base? I think that's a really important one. And Kai has said that tenants bring so much to an organisation in terms of ideas, input of work and time, which saves the organisations thousands or would have cost them as much. Yet in recruitment, it's hard to get a role because the class is not having enough experience in the sector. Samantha, I'm going to bring you in before we go to Simon for probably final thoughts. And I would do my best to raise some of the other points in the chat before we wrap up, but over to you.
Yeah, just going to be really succinct. So I think I'm just going to throw several things out there. One, workforce development, workforce strategy, recruitment strategy, whichever people want to label it as, I do think needs a rethink. It's a bit stale. Coupled with looking at organisational frameworks for competencies. So that focuses on the qualities of an individual and also those personal attributes that we're looking for, which does come down to behaviours, and that feeds into the transferable skills. That really robust onboarding, induction, qualifications, and that support at the early stages does require input. It does take time, and it can put extra workload onto those more senior managers who are recruiting in. However, the rewards come further down the line in terms of productivity and improvement in the customer service. And what you'd expect to see at some point is maybe a reduction in complaints. So I think it's not one answer, it has to be broader, and it comes down to workforce development strategies.
Thank you very much. There's been a few points made in the chat around the LECIH Choose Housing campaign and what's going on there, which is definitely worth checking out. Dawson has mentioned about look at the training models for tenants and flip this to find out what skills they have and tap into them as co-creators of what we need. Keith, I love Jamie's point about rewriting the story of social housing. Is a discussion to be had about who should be the providers, big versus small housing associations versus local authorities. Who's it for? Is social housing a safety net or a tenure of choice? Evelyn, Sani, I did my degree at London South Bank University. By 2021, the university closed the programme down, and yet today we're talking about the competence and conduct standards. Alicia said our CEO has a role at the local college, which is brilliant to hear. And I'm just seeing, and I think that's covering most of the big overarching points that have been made. Simon, I'm going to go to you for kind of final thoughts. Good luck trying to wrap this up a little bit in terms of that kind of, I guess, wider overview. But I think this shows exactly why it needs bringing to the table, but also why I think, certainly from my perspective, and if I'm talking about this very selfishly, hiring managers need to think more broadly, because quite often, they're struggling to recruit, and I get that. They'll come to someone like myself or my colleague Kim or my colleague Athena, or whoever it might be, and be able to turn around and go, right, well, this is what I want. And so, well, I'm telling you from a market perspective, that doesn't exist. So have you considered X, Y, Z? And quite often it's a firm no, whereas you've obviously looked at things and gone, well, okay, if it doesn't exist and the market is telling me it doesn't exist, what more broadly can we do? And I guess that's, the reason why the conversation was brought forth in the first place today.
I mean, how do I wrap this up? It's I'm lost for words right now, because I mean, there's been some amazing points brought throughout. I mean, in the comments from everybody who's spoken today, I mean, it's given me more confidence that there are people out there who have got that wider mindset, who are looking outside of what we call our career now, or may not have been previously, but we're all here for the same reasons. We want to give great customer service, and that is what is resounding throughout all of these all these comments, is that we want to give great service, but it's also how we get to that great service element. I think for me, that is the big point out of this topic today, and we could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. Will we ever solve it? Probably not, but we can all make a good contribution to being part of that. And yeah, I think really great session.
Thank you very much. And I think it's exactly that. It's about being more open-minded and going, actually, who can we learn from? Who's doing something different? Can we listen? And are we able to listen? And that's kind of one of the things with the roundtable that we've been constantly kind of drive, particularly this year more than anything else, is let's disagree on things and do it respectfully, and let's listen and really kind of go, what is the other side of the coin? And I really, really thank you, Simon, for bringing it to the table today. To those who are new, as I mentioned, we do this every single week. Next week, we are going to be discussing how do we balance development and asset management for the benefit of tenants. So another, really easy discussion to kind of try and get on top of. That's going to be with Sarah Daly from Agile Property and Home. So she's coming to the table to discuss that. It's the same link for next week if you want to join. But for now, a huge thank you to Simon for bringing the topic to the table today. We had nearly 60 of us in the room, which is fantastic. And Simon, I guess if people want to follow up the conversation, LinkedIn is probably the way forward.
Absolutely, yeah. Feel free to drop me a message.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks for your time, all.
Thank you.